Every time a new couple or a person moves into University Place, um, I feel like that they should know some of the history of how Place came to be. Back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I used to go every noon during the week. I'd go to the Ishmael Center on campus at Purdue University for exercise. This was guided exercise. One day, and Dick Nelson, a retired Purdue professor, and I shared the aisle in the dressing room, and we began talking one day. Now that we are both retiring, where do you plan to live? And both of us agreed that we did not wish to retire to the desert or the swamps. So that ruled out Florida and Arizona. And we said, well, since we have lived in this community for the last 60 years, all of our lifetime friends are here. And we want to retire in West Lafayette. And so from that, in 1996, I was given an opportunity, Marilee and I were given an opportunity to go to Israel with a group, and the person who was organizing this had lived in Israel, and a New Zealander who became an American. And he called me one day and said, Marion, I'm putting together a group to go to Israel, and I need another couple. Besides, Marilee and I had already decided we'd go. 2 weeks later, he called and said, Marion, I need 2 more couples. So I invited 3 couples, and Marilee and me, 4 couples who had Purdue backgrounds, to go on this trip to Israel with our leader, Harry Haynes. And while we were, our first stop was in Egypt, and while we were in a bus going to the Suez Canal and on our way to Jerusalem, we were waiting on the ferry across the Suez Canal as we were on our way to Jerusalem, and someone asked of our 4 couples from Purdue, somebody said, where do you want to live after we retire? And we were all, some of us had already retired. This was in 1996. And so that started a conversation between 3 of those couples who helped to start University Place. When we came back home, we started meeting occasionally just to discuss a place we'd like to live. And out of those discussions arose the issue, well, let's build our own, or let's plan our own retirement center. And that's where the concept of University Place began. And that would have been after 1996, after we had asked at the Suez Canal, started a conversation, where do you want to live after you retire? And so we began meeting occasionally, and in the late 90s that became once a month. And we began to keep notes about what kind of place we wanted to live and how we would make it happen. Well, all of us knew at that time, the 4 of us who were then retired from Purdue, all of us had known Ken Burns, who was Executive Vice President and Treasurer at Purdue. And we went to Ken one day and said, Ken, would you be our advisor in planning this retirement center? And his first comment was, you know that building retirement centers is not a mission of Purdue University. And we said, we understand that. But you bring to the table experience that none of us has. None of us has any experience on how to make a $50 million project go, how to put it together. So he agreed to meet with us a few times. And at the first time we met, he invited another one of the vice presidents to join in this discussion. And then someone from the Purdue Research Foundation, he asked the vice president or the chairman, someone from the Purdue Research Foundation to join our discussions. And about our second meeting, he said, you know, we also need a good real estate person who knows the real estate of northern Indiana. And so all of us agreed on Charlie Shook, of an outstanding real estate family in the community. So Charlie joined us. And Charlie and the other vice president and Ken Burns and our 4 couples met in Ken's office once a month for a year. And that was the most fantastic consulting. Imagine having that kind of consulting person to provide us their ideas and time to plan University Place. We told Ken, you deal with large building projects all the time, and none of us brings that experience to the table. And so Ken agreed, and we met in his office once a month for a year. And at the end of that year, we were ready to invite a representative from each of the three largest builders of senior living communities in the country. A top officer from each of three different companies to make a site visit to Purdue University, to sit down with our committee, with Ken Burns, with Mayor Sonia Marjoram. And it was while we were interviewing, while we were having these three different companies send top representatives at different times, and not at the same time, to make a site visit, we were contacted by the Franciscan Sisters of Chicago. And they said, we're looking for a new model for senior living communities. And what we hear about your planning, we like what we hear. And that sounds like a model we would like to be a part of. And we put them off for several months. In fact, we just discouraged them. We don't want to talk to you. We're already in the middle of interviewing building companies. They kept insisting. And we finally relented. One, because they said they would take care, that they would handle all of the expenses. Whereas the big companies wanted 15 to 20% of the investment to be made by local companies or banks. Well, we hadn't really talked with any of the local banks or financiers, and so the offer that the Franciscan Sisters made was very attractive, and we began to talk about if we give them our business and ask them to be our developers and eventually manage, provide the management for the senior living community, what does that entail? So we began to think, well, we want it to be, first of all, we live in a community that brings people from all over the world and from all religions. So we don't want this to be a Catholic community, or to even appear to be a Catholic community. So we told the Franciscans, number one, there will be no large crucifix anywhere on campus if we give this business to you. Number two, there will be no typical Catholic chapel anywhere on campus. And we talked about other kinds of things that would make sure that we remained an ecumenical and a community that would welcome retirees from any religious background or any professional background. And so that was the understanding. It's interesting that the people we were talking to from the Franciscans said, we'll have to go to headquarters to check this out with them. We said, you don't need to check it out with anybody. You can tell them that these are our requirements. And they agreed to these requirements. And so when we received their first architectural drawings of the main building at University Place, it had a typical Catholic chapel. And we immediately told them that that was unacceptable. We had long discussions about what kind of room, what kind of space would we provide at University Place to make it available for religious purposes or meditation that would welcome a person from any religious background. And so we decided we would have an ecumenical, this was made by the four couples, that it would be an ecumenical meditation room. We didn't even call it a chapel. That suggests Christian only. And so we called it an ecumenical meditation room. And it was very interesting to us that when one of the sisters came from headquarters to dedicate the ecumenical meditation room after the place was built, in her presentation and dedication, she told how that room had been designed by one of the nuns, one of the sisters, and suggesting that that was their idea, an ecumenical meditation, and it was not their idea at all. But this is simply the kinds of caution that we were trying to take to make it a home that would welcome people from any background, any acceptable background, any religion, and come from whatever profession, that wanted to share in this living experience in this ecumenical setting. So that's one of the first, I think that's following that idea through and getting the sisters to accept that was one of the real significant decisions that was made very early in, before any building started. The Franciscans then started building in the early, about 1999, they started moving earth and started building in 1999 or 2000. And the move-in date was it opened on May the 12th, 2003. And Marilee and I were the first, we had first choice of apartments, and we chose, so we moved in. We were the first to move in on the day that this place opened. Another idea I think that every resident needs to know is that from the very beginning of this relationship with the Sisters of Chicago, we told them in our early discussions that we wanted to have a working relationship with the Purdue University. And since Purdue had had such an important role in helping us put the ideas together and how to make this place happen, we wanted to have an affiliation, an official affiliation agreement with Purdue University. Now, what does that mean? That means that a community like University Place has a large population of elderly people as a marvelous base to study the process of aging and all of the different physical and mental and other problems that come with aging. And so Dr. Ken Ferraro of Purdue University, head of CALC, the Center on Aging and the Life Course, was an enthusiastic supporter from the very beginning of our discussions of building a new senior living community in this community, in West Lafayette, and as close to the university as possible. We spent days, if not months, looking for sites, the best site to build Purdue, to build University Place. But in establishing an affiliation agreement, we found that Ken was our strongest supporter of Ken Ferraro, Dr. Ken Ferraro, because he, in his research and work at Purdue, he is a trained sociologist, but he worked in what was formerly called the genealogy, the old folks research and aging. he was an appropriate one to help us think through an affiliation agreement. It made it possible, if we have an affiliation agreement with the university, that means it has been signed and approved at the top administrative level at Purdue, and it's the top and administrative level of the Franciscan Sisters of Chicago. And that made it possible then for anybody in any department at the university who wished to do research with an aging community, whether it's hearing or sight or balance, whatever. Each department did not, every time a new study was brought into being, they do not have to go through all of the paperwork because it's already been signed at the top in both organizations. And so we find the first affiliation agreement was, the details had been worked out after this had been open a year or two. I think it was the affiliation agreement, the first one was signed in 2004, a year after we opened. And it has worked beautifully ever since that signing. There have been many, both undergraduate and graduate students, under the direction of a Purdue professor from some department. Ever since this place opened, there have been studies going on the physical, mental, and aging processes of this population. And of course, not only does it carry out needed research, but it brings young people into contact with this older community. And every time any young people walk in the front door at University Place, our spirits are lifted. And this has been a wonderful experience since the time this place opened, as there have been so many students that come in and work with and talk to and study aging with this population. So it's been a very effective way to help, to benefit Purdue and students at Purdue, and to benefit the residents, all of the residents of University Place. The four couples who really worked together for several years included Marilee and Marion Bumgarner, Bob Sorensen, Dick and Betty Nelson, and Jim and Christina Ulrichs. Unfortunately, Christina, who was one of the most enthusiastic persons in helping to plan this place, died of pancreatic cancer just a few months before it opened, so she never saw the finished project, which she contributed so much to in our planning. But we moved in, the doors were opened in mid-May 2003. And one of the interesting things early on was that we set up a series of committees. In fact, we decided we wanted it to be, as much as possible, a resident-driven community. We wanted residents to at least be informed of and even considered in discussions of any future changes in administration. And that was followed in that we even had residents involved in interviewing new directors and certain members of the administrative staff. And so through certainly even up until now, administrators have residents of University Place have had involvement in interviewing new administrators. Four of us originators of University Place all had Purdue connections. We were very keen that we have a location as close as possible to the campus. And we spent 3 or 4 years, from when we first started thinking about the place, we started looking for a location that might be as close to Purdue and conveniently located to the campus as possible. We considered places on Calbert Road north of West Lafayette. We considered places that much further away from campus than we are now, than our final location. Ken Burns, when he was still working with us in the planning, said Purdue owns all of the land west of McCormick Road up to the railway and north of State Street and up to Cumberland Avenue, that area. And he said, we would make you a good price on a campus if you chose that area. Well, we thought that was a great idea, and we could have had a campus. That was before the new tennis court buildings and the soccer fields and so on. Purdue had put their athletics, so much of their athletic activity in that area. That was still blank. And we thought that was a good possibility. But it turns out that all of a sudden they started developing that, and Ken told us this. He said, we know that Highway 231 is going to come across that property sometime. And we have, since we're a sister state organization to the Transportation Department of Indiana, they would have priority over space to put 231 on that property. Well, we'd already walked over the property. After he told us that at the beginning, we walked over the property and chose a spot that's today right in the middle of 231. And Ken told us at the time, he said, we don't know when the state is going to put a highway across there, but it's coming. And it didn't come until after this was already built. But Dick Nelson and I met twice with the engineer in the Indiana Department of Transportation, who was in charge of laying out the route of 231. And he said, we don't know yet where it will be, and it'll probably be 6 or 8 years before we do know. And it turned out it was 6 or 8 years. So we abandoned that idea of getting Purdue Research Foundation property over in that area. But all of a sudden, Christina Ulrich found out from the park superintendent that this farm land where we are now located, this farmland was available, and high-density builders had been trying to buy this land for years, but the family would not sell it for high-density housing. They gave the wooded area in the back of our property, they gave those woods to the city park. So that's the part of the city park now. And they'd given other land to the city park, the Cedar Bog Park. Anyway, we were fortunate to be able to buy this farm. We told the family, the family of our plans for University Place. Oh, they said our parents would love their land being used this way. Their parents were long since gone. And so we were able to buy this land. I say we, the Franciscans. We gave this information to the Franciscans after we decided to go with them as our builders. And they bought this farm, and about 65 acres, and our current campus occupies about 35 acres of that 65 acres. So we still have some acreage to the northwest of our current campus, have some acreage for future expansion if that's ever a desirable move. So, but we looked on the north, east, southwest, all around West Lafayette, and came up when the Cypress Farm became available to us. This is perfect. It is so close to campus, and it is so easy to get to activities on campus. As all of us know, any large university brings great benefits to any community, and Purdue certainly is easily available, whether it's going to plays or to football games or basketball, whatever. It's very close to our campus and easy to get to. We became seriously involved in the development of University Place, and the Franciscan Sisters had been chosen, and they were providing us with draft plans of the different buildings. We began to think about the various programs that we needed, and how, if we were going to be a resident-driven community, how do we organize our residents? So we began, as the four of us couples who were working, as we traveled around to scientific meetings or around the country, we were always stopping in at different places. Marilee and I visited a senior living, and rather new senior living community in Seattle, Washington, right next door to the University of Washington. But we visited at least a dozen or 15 such facilities that had been built all over the country, in Tucson, Arizona, and at Cornell, Oberlin College in Ohio, the University of Virginia. There's a senior living community near the University of Virginia. But we visited about 15 or so of these homes, and every time, a couple of times, a carload of us went to the one at IU. It's just near the football stadium. I don't recall the name of it, but we went there twice and talked. We would always try to talk to residents as well as administrators to get a feel for how they ran the places, and if residents had any participation in management decisions. Also, a part of this getting acquainted with others, we would ask others to stop, whenever we would always visit, not only with administration, but with residents, and ask them what were the good things, what was left out, what would they do differently if they had a chance to redo. So we got lots of ideas. For instance, one of the ideas we got from IU, the one at IU, was that in the large building where there were apartments and public corridors, they said that the first thing you do, appoint an art committee and make that art committee responsible for deciding what can be hanging in corridors. The lady who was talking to us about it said, we've almost had fights over garbage that's been hung in the public corridors because we had no rules about hanging art in the corridors. So be sure that you have an art committee, and that it's known from the beginning that the art committee must approve anything that is hanging. But we learned so many things from talking with at least a dozen of large senior living communities from all over the U.S. And that was a good learning experience for all of us. And as a result of that, we set up a system of committees and appointed committees before this place ever opened. as we found out who's interested in moving into University Place, we we'd get people to agree to be a chairman of the art committee. Barbara agreed to do that and has been that ever since, but she's just retired as chairman of the art committee, Barbara Becker. And in this planning, another thing that was important to us is to keep the mayor of West Lafayette involved and to keep the area plan commission involved. I had two different meetings with the area plan commission to make sure that they knew of our plans and knew of our dreams of what kind of place this would be. Mayor Marjoram was very supportive of us, and she worked hard to make sure that we would have city service for water and septic system, because it wasn't available to this area before we came to the mayor to ask if we could get city service for water and sewer. So those kinds of things take time to work out, but we did, and we had 4 couples that were willing to spend a lot of their time and effort and energy in making these things happen. And by the time before we ever opened, we had about 15 different committees. The woodworking committee and the grounds and facilities committee, but we had all of these different committees set up to help to guide the landscaping, and not only the landscaping, but the building and the use. Not so much in architecture, that part, we didn't have a part in that kind of the development, but certainly we had committees, a dining services committee. Mary Lee is a registered dietitian, and over the years in her profession, she had consultancies in a number of senior living communities, and she said it horrified her to see in a community of a population of elderly people, half of whom never feel very good, and to set them down to a very poor quality food is a crime. And she saw that so many times, where there was no quality food available to the residents of some of these, nursing homes. And so she insisted that when we were negotiating with the Franciscan sisters there, with their people, negotiating about the dining services here, Mary Lee said, one of our requirements is that we have a certified registered dietitian and an executive chef. And the Franciscan said, we've never hired an executive chef. Well, Mary Lee says, we require an executive chef. And we do. And ever since the day this place was opened, we've had an executive chef. And a little later, they've hired a registered dietitian. And we also, in the food service, we also usually have at least one, sometimes 2, dietetic students interning here. So that we've had that wonderful participation of Purdue in the dietetics area. Another idea that I would simply like to touch on, and that is that it was from the very beginning, it has been our mission to develop the spirit of community at University Place. It's interesting that as we discussed the kind of dining facility we wanted, it was suggested to us by the Franciscans that, or at least the people that they had employed to help design our dining, it was recommended to us that we assign seats in the dining room. It was also suggested that we not only assign seats, but have a 5 o'clock seating and a 6:30 seating. And our attitude was that this is nonsense. We are here to build community and not to develop cliques, people, the same 3 people eating together every time. We wanted everybody to know everybody else and to feel that we wanted each resident to feel that he or she is a member of a caring community. And as I look back over the years since the day this place opened, we have certainly enjoyed this spirit of community and wanting to belong to the community and not to a clique or to a small group. And having different committees that are concerned about the various aspects of our operations has helped us, even that has helped us to develop the spirit of community and participation in our home.